Hi everybody. This is a short Explain Everything slideshow about the learning target, understanding how popular culture brings about societal change. Because things that are popular now really do change our society in some ways. Some things stick around and some things don't. But we're going to be looking at the country of Nepal today and looking at not only popular culture in Nepal, but something that's popular in our culture that is starting to change the culture of parts of Nepal. So here we go. We're going to start a discussion today with Mount Everest. So Mount Everest is at 29,035 feet. It was named after a British surveyor named Sir George Everest, but it was known as the goddess mother of the world by the local people. Now, you have to understand that Mount Everest sits right between the country of Nepal and the country of China, specifically the part of China called Tibet. And for a long time, Nepal and Tibet didn't allow outsiders into their countries. And then in 1921, Tibet opened its borders and allowed people to climb Everest from the northern location. It was only in 1949 that Nepal opened its borders. Okay? Now, the Sherpas who live around there, and Sherpa means Easterner, okay, refers to an ethnic group that migrated to the Everest region from eastern Tibet about 450 years ago. But in modern times, it's been come to mean any porter, climber, or trek leader. These are jobs that Sherpas have been doing for about 100 years now. So when you hear Sherpa, that definitely means they're talking about people that are going to help you climb Mount Everest. Not only do they help you climb, but they also teach you about Sherpa culture and about Buddhism when you go. Now, climbing Mount Everest is incredibly hard. Many people have died, not only from trying to climb Everest, but from exposure. I know you guys have seen a movie about Everest in science class, so you've seen a little bit of what people go through. Pushing up to 8,000 meters is something that could kill you. Okay? There are very few climbs in the world like this. Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa is similar in that you're lacking for oxygen when you climb. It's very, very strenuous activity and not everybody makes it. But a lot of people believe that it is the ultimate in climbing. If you can climb Everest, then you deserve a lot of respect. Okay? It takes a ton of courage to do it. And lots of people who have climbed it are very, very proud of their achievements and they tell you right away. So take a look at some of these pictures. You see the 1924 Everest expedition was all men. And they're decked out in just whatever warm clothing they had at the time. They didn't have the polar fleece that we have now. They didn't have the extra warm down jackets, the special glasses or anything. They just wore what they had. Today's mountaineers are a big, diverse lot. I mean, there are some people who have a lot of money because, let me tell you, it costs a lot of money to climb Everest, at least $25,000. You've got to hire the Sherpas, you've got to stay at different base camps along the way. You can't climb it all in one day. And the majority of climbers are people that just really, really love adventure. And they're like those people up in the top right corner. They're generally young. They're not really, really rich, but they have saved up their money and this is something that they want to do. Okay? It's very strenuous, so you've got to be in good shape to do it. You've got to know what's going on. But there have been people from really like teenagers to a blind man that's climbed Everest. So it's really not out of the ordinary for someone to say, I'm going to climb Everest and actually be able to do it. So if you look really closely at that picture on the top, you'll see an arrow pointing to some little tiny dot. All those little tiny dots of color, the blue and the yellow, those are all different tents. Those are base camps that are set out at the bottom of the mountain. They're a place where people can sleep. They're a place for people to meet. That's where your food gets cooked. It's literally a home for you as you deal with the change in altitude and as your body gets used to the lack of oxygen at different levels as you get closer to the top of the mountain. So today, the Sherpas speak a dialect of Tibetan, and all of their literature and history comes from really old Tibetan religious books. There are about 30,000 Sherpas that live in Nepal. Around 3,000 of them live in the Khumbu region on the south side of Everest. And the south side is the side you'd climb if you were in Nepal. Now, traditionally, Sherpas have grown potatoes. They've raised yaks for milk, for their hide, for wool, and to carry loads. Working at altitude, and Khumbu villages are about 13,000 feet up, it's been their way of life. And apart from a few sacred mountains, the peaks that tower over them were really not that much of an interest to them. But with the opening of Nepal in the 1950s, the number of Sherpas working in mountaineering really increased. And in the 1970s, large-scale trekking made climbing and trekking parts of their economy. From the first British expedition in 1921, the strength and honesty and dedication that Sherpas have shown have made them the ideal companions on a mountain. Every Everest expedition since then has relied on Sherpa support. Many Sherpas have summited and many more have lost their lives. But the visitors that come to Everest have really had lasting effects on the Sherpa culture. Sherpas sometimes wear the same clothes as Westerners do. They have now the same gear as people from the West. That's state-of-the-art. And this is something that they get sometimes from the people who climb with them. They bring them gear. But they've also brought some negative influences, including all the deforestation and the litter. There's tons of litter on the side of Everest. In recent years, there have been renewed efforts to limit the impact of climbing and trekking on the local environment and the culture. And there have been efforts to clean up Everest Base Camp. Once it was just full of garbage, and now it's almost spotless for future climbers that want to go there. So Sherpas are really such a big part of Everest that without them, no one would really be able to climb Mount Everest. But we have to be very careful as visitors to countries not to bring all of our culture with us and replace their culture. The Sherpas' commitment to spiritualism and the compassion that they show and their wisdom, that all comes from Tibetan Buddhism, and it's part of their lifestyle. And if we were to change their religion, we would really change the type of people they're going to be. And the more of our popular culture that we bring with us, the more money maybe we throw around, the less appealing their own culture would become. So it's a delicate balance when working with people in native cultures to make sure that you don't influence them too much and try to replace the good things about their own culture. If you're climbing Everest, you're going to do a lot of ice climbing. And you're going to use a plethora of tools and safety gear to make sure that you're going to be safe. You can take guided climbing lessons. You can practice in sub-zero temperatures. You can practice in the sun. And with the right training and the right equipment, just about everybody can ice climb. And it's really, really good exercise. You got to get your body ready for it because there's a lot of things you do with your arm and with your core. So anything to do with pull-ups or squats, things like that are very good for you. You're going to need some traditional ice tools, including a leash that you wrap around your hand to help you keep hold of the tool. It's quite easy to drop a tool, and your tool won't be worth anything if it's lying 20 feet below you on the ground. So you got to keep it on a leash. It also comes in handy if you lose your footing and you need to hang from the ice until you regain it. Of course, your rope and your belay will also hold you, so your ice tool is not your sole protection. Crampons are also necessary for a climber to get traction on the snow and ice. Like cleats, crampons are sharp metal spikes that come from the bottom of your boots, and they dig into the ice as you climb. You can clip or strap crampons to the bottom of your boots, or you can wear boots with crampons built in. If you've ever seen Ms. Melcher in the wintertime, she wears crampons that she straps onto the outside of her shoes so she never slips on the ice. It's a really good idea. You also have to decide if you want 1-point or 2-point crampons. Crampons generally have spikes that stick out in the front of the shoe, and that usually is the first thing to make contact with the ice. Now, ice climbers have to protect themselves from falling, and so when you're climbing ice, especially something like the Khumbu Ice Falls, which is one of the most famous parts of Everest, you've got to protect yourself by using ice screws and ropes. As you climb, you place ice screws in strategic places, and then you clip in a rope, which would save your life if you fell. Well-placed screws can support hundreds of pounds of force, but ice screws are only as strong as the ice in which you've screwed them. So you've got to be very, very careful and make sure that you're really getting them in there so that they will hold your weight. Also should wear a helmet. You need to protect your head and eyes from falling chunks of ice, and appropriate cold weather clothing and gloves are necessary. Now, Sherpas have lots of impressive Everest records, including the most time summited for men and women, the quickest ascent, the quickest descent, the most time spent on top, and the youngest climber to reach the summit. Sherpas will carry a lot of your heavy gear as you climb up Everest because you're going to have to stop on the way in camp. So there are a lot of ladders that span the crevasses you might find like in the Khumbu Ice Falls. Unfortunately, just a little while ago, a Nepali guide that was on Mount Everest actually plummeted 150 feet, which is the equivalent of falling from a 15-story building into an ice crevasse. The guy's name was Namgya, and he was climbing toward Camp 2. He was about 2/3 of the way up the 29,000-foot mountain, and like many other Sherpas, he was making a living from doing this. He was serving as a guide and a porter. He didn't actually take safety precautions before crossing one of the many aluminum ladders that are laid flat to bridge the giant cracks in the Khumbu ice region. It's the most dangerous part of the climb, and each climber is supposed to clip his or her harness to safety lines that are anchored into the ice before crossing any of those ladders. But Namgya was a veteran climber, and he'd climbed Everest in 2010, 2011, but he apparently skipped clipping in, and he fell after one of his crampons caught on a rung of the ladder. It's not completely uncommon among Sherpas to skip clipping into the safety line. They usually just race across the ladder. Of course, his death could have been prevented if he'd had the standard safe climbing practices that all the other climbers have to follow. Right? So it's a very sad case of something that can happen. His body was taken out of the crevasse and brought back to his family, but it's a very sad case. Now, another part of Nepalese popular culture that I had never heard about before, in my research, I found out it was something called Yarchagumba. And the Yarchagumba in the hands of that person in the picture, it looks like a shriveled brown chili pepper, but it's not actually. It's highly prized to be used as a medicine in some parts of Asia. If you translate the word Yarchagumba, it means summer grass winter worm. And what happens is there's a parasitic fungus that invades a larva of a ghost moth. And when the fungus gets in, it takes all the vital organs inside that moth. Okay, so everything that makes the moth be able to function, and it turns it into a cobweb-like mess. And then it sends a wispy sprout through the dead insect's head. And that's what you're looking at right there are dead larvae, okay, that have been transformed by this parasitic fungus. This only happens in the Himalayan mountains and the Tibetan plateau, but only at the beginning of the monsoon season, and only in specific spots, like on slopes of grasses and shrubs and milk vetch. You have to climb up 10,000 to 16,000 feet to get them. But a pound of Yarchagumba can sell for about $50,000, which is more than the price of gold. So the fact that this native sort of, I want to say species, but not, it's like two species in one, okay? This native fungus that has invaded this larva lives there and all of a sudden it's worth a lot of money, has really changed the way that people interact with that species. Because instead of doing their normal farming on the side of the mountain and other jobs, they rely on this one thing, the Yarchagumba, to bring in all the money they need for the entire year. And people can be very territorial about looking for it. Yarchagumba is really, really interesting in that it's both Chinese and a Tibetan medicine that's been a tradition in those societies for a long time. It supposedly has an excellent balance of yin and yang because it's both a vegetable, a fungus, and an animal. Most commonly, it's used to treat anything from fatigue to cancer. It's supposed to give you more energy. There are lots of different substances in there that actually people have been able to isolate chemically and take those things and make more of them into certain types of medicine. But if you were to go to, let's say, Japan and order a vegetable soup that might have some Yarchagumba floating on top, it could cost you about $100 a bowl. So this stuff is worth a lot of money, and there's great competition to get it. So I'd love for you to read the article at the link below because it's a really interesting look at what has happened to the people who live in the area since Yarchagumba has become so popular. It's actually hurt the Nepalese communities as much as it has helped them. So I'd like you to try to explain how this part of Asian popular culture has turned out to be not such a good thing for Nepal.